What do you truly believe is the deepest, darkest secret held by the US government? Story 1. Just how many close to the world endings we've had. You know how they showed an X comet that had a trajectory very close to Earth, or that deadly pandemic virus that you only heard about for a couple weeks? How about smuggled nukes making their way into the wrong hands? Yeah, my money says that we've probably been in some seriously hairy crap before, but we, the people, never had an idea. During the Cold War, it is widely reported that the Soviet Union smuggled in backpack-sized nukes to the US and kept them in major cities hidden, so in the event of war, they would not even have to launch them, but have them go off in some random house, taking out a city. Story 2. I'm going to just go ahead and say this. Even though it might not be very popular, I was very skeptical of the 9/11 attacks for the longest time. While I don't believe the entire conspiracy, there was always one point that bothered me very much: put options. There were a record number of put options on important US stocks the day before the attacks. All this really says to me is someone who should have said something didn't, ultimately making a ton of money. A put option is a bet that a stock will fall. Story 3. Considering how Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, Pogrom, Haditha, Mahmudiyah, etc., was well known by higher up officials, but were only exposed after whistleblowers and media finding out. I'm willing to guess that there are a lot more war crimes committed in Iraq and Afghanistan. People don't seem to understand that the insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq are not the mindless bots the media paints them to be. Every person has his/her story and motives. The US Army's crimes are the greatest recruitment tool for its own enemy. Story 4. I genuinely don't think we killed bin Laden. I suspect he died of natural causes ages ago. It's completely untenable to say, hey, American people, you know the dude that we went to 2 wars, spent trillions of dollars, and died in the thousands to find? Well, he got away. Oops. They have to give something to the frothing masses, so they just offered some other dude and called him bin Laden close to election time. I find the total lack of proof or evidence in the form of pictures, a body, etc., to be suspicious. I thought maybe I could just take their word for it, but I have changed my stance on that. Story 5. The global collateral accounts. Hands down, this secret is even more heavily guarded than all the deep underground military bases, UFOs, and alien stuff combined. The official total for the entire amount of gold said to be above ground since humanity first began mining the precious metal is approximately 160,000 metric tons. Sorry, nope. Evidence now indicates that a more accurate figure is well in excess of 2 million metric tons. It is why World War I and World War II were fought. It is why Kennedy was killed. It is what all currencies are backed by. It is what's being used to control the world. It is also what could be used to free the world. In recent decades, the movement to free the accounts has finally reached the tipping point, and we're all about to go for the ride of our lives. Story 6. 10% chance it is some technology discovered via government R&D that would benefit the population as a whole, but it would not be beneficial to the status quo of the ruling class, so they are keeping it under wraps. This is just gut reaction truthiness on my part. I mean, there are probably plenty of bloody things it has done, but people kill people all the time. Not really anything special. 4% chance that some other part of the government had something to do with JFK's assassination just for political gain. Story 7. There is no telling how deep the rabbit hole goes when it comes to the US government's shameful actions. Even prior to the war on terror, we had the Cold War and the war on drugs. The CIA would often perform horrid operations simply because someone in another country was socialist and in power. This included harming our own citizens simply to prevent some petty political gain by commies. Meanwhile, our own capitalist economy is killing dreams when someone on Wall Street would find a business that is worth more when liquidated than left operating. Story 8, that they have no idea what they are doing, so they hire outside experts, consultants, and contractors to do the heavy lifting for them. They claim this saves money and makes things better. After all, they are letting free enterprise, which is always more efficient, pick up where the government leaves off. Back to their not knowing what they are doing, they fail to remember that what free enterprise is good at is looking out for its own interests. That is why companies are profitable. The fallout happens when the private companies brought in to do the government's work go beyond the scope of what is right or legal. Then, because some government official signed off on bringing them in to do the job, that official has to protect the disaster that privatization has caused them. Story 9, who really assassinated JFK? It's been over 60 years, and each president that comes into office keeps pushing back the release date. A JFK conspiracy dies and goes to heaven. When he arrives at the pearly gates, God is there to receive him. Welcome. You are permitted to ask me one question, which I will answer truthfully. Without hesitating, the conspiracy theorist asks, who really shot Kennedy? God replies, Lee Harvey Oswald shot him from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. There were no accomplices. He acted alone. The conspiracy theorist pauses, thinks to himself, then says, damn, this goes higher up than I thought. Story 10. NGAD and FAXX are a lot farther along than they're letting on. Son of Blackbird is already doing active sorties. There are UAVs and UKVs operating right now that are getting mistaken for UAPs because their flight profiles are so bizarre. The government is letting UFO conspiracy theories do the heavy lifting to keep anyone who might be trying to get information on them confused. A lot of that is about ensuring that adversaries don't have a target to aim for in their R&D. I recall Intel people losing their mind over Trump revealing surveillance photos of Iran because the imagery proved that older US satellites had solved optics issues that many considered beyond the laws of physics. Simply letting adversaries know that a problem is solvable is a huge Intel failure. Just saw an article about a stealth aircraft concept that doesn't have any control surfaces. Rudders and ailerons are one of the biggest challenges in keeping aircraft stealthy, as they provide angled surfaces to reflect EM waves. The concept aircraft uses jets of high pressure air from slots on the wings and tail to alter airflow along the vehicle's surface and affect maneuverability. An aircraft with this tech would look more and more like a simple triangle, which is a common shape for UAVs. Story 11, just how far the US went to destroy communism. The project to destroy communism is probably the largest single undertaking a nation state has ever embarked upon. It took nothing short than biblical amounts of wealth, manpower, energy, and control of much of the entire world as possible, and undermining the parts you could not control to even make this happen. We're all aware of the big sweeping policies that the Americans did to kill communism in the crib, the Bretton Woods Treaty, containment, the various wars they fought, the social policies, the Navy, the globalism. All of these things are quite literally the pillars of our modern society, and it was all primarily done for one reason only. If all the things we know about are literally not just era-defining events, but defining events in humanity's progression as a whole, just imagine what sort of other stuff went under the radar. The only reason Europe is in the position they're in today is because the Americans looked at how much it would cost to rebuild it and said, is that less than communism? Okay, sign the check. All the NATO alliances originally started as essentially a bribe. Trillions of dollars was spent, and the lives of billions of people were altered to eliminate the communist threat. We may never see a national concerted effort to accomplish a single goal on this grand scale again. I really want to know the nitty-gritty. If it took nothing short of altering the world for a century, imagine how many stories and conspiracies are being hushed up in the name of that end. Story 12. This was a good question. I guess I would answer that they are hiding a double standard. What I mean is, they talk about cutting services, services that our tax dollars would pay for and have paid for, such as Social Security and Medicare. There is a very real discussion about raising the age of retirement. I've heard from the government economists, because I'm very much into economics, that it's impossible to fund a single payer health insurance which would cover every man, woman, and child getting free health care. But the upper tier of our government, such as Congress, the President, Supreme Court, etc., get these services for free, even with the government shutdown that was looming and could be again coming up in 45 days. Congress, the President, and the courts are unaffected by any of that. They will still get paid. So why? Why did they get services? In fact, their paychecks are not taxable. Think about that. Again, why? I thought we are a country of freedom and where everyone is equal. Story 13. Flight 93 was shot down by the military, and the heroes taking down the plane was propaganda to rally nationalism to support going to war. The flight was in the air. Well, after we knew the towers were terrorist attacks, flights had been grounded, and it was reported the plane was on a path for DC and not responding to traffic control. Fighter jets were already scrambled. The debris was spread over a large area with no crater. There were several reports on the day of in the aftermath with eyewitnesses reporting seeing a fighter jet tailing a low-flying plane airliner. Then the hero story started and was never mentioned again. I'd actually be disappointed if the military didn't shoot it down. They had plenty of time to do so and knew what was happening at that point, and to allow it to go unchecked would be a major failure on the military's part. Story 14. I have a very personal reason for wanting to know what they found at Roswell. My grandfather was in the Air Force and was present at the site. All he ever said about it was it wasn't a damn weather balloon, then shut down. He was low ranking, basically just there to drive the higher ranking personnel, but he saw something, and I want to know what it was. He also firmly believed in aliens, so that just adds to my curiosity, especially given how Southern Baptist he was. Jesse Marcel was one of my family members, and even though I only knew him as a small child, I knew well and good he didn't think that was a damn weather balloon. The mental load of what happened at Roswell and the secrecy around it affected him for his entire life. I only knew him as an old man, and he was still deeply affected by the events. Story 15, UFOs, and before you skip to the next comment, hear me out. Notice that whenever a topic comes up that could get the government in trouble, someone makes a movie or a TV show about the topic and the media pushes it commercially just to make fun of people for actually believing in the theory and saying, we don't live in the movies, we live in reality, which is exactly what happened with UFOs in the 60s. Story 16. The FBI was complicit or entirely responsible for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. They did so because they were unable to convince him to end himself or ruin him with rumors about his affairs. The formation of the Rainbow Coalition was terrifying for government insiders, as it represented the possible dissolution of racism and classism, preventing the average American from attacking the power mostly concentrated in the hands of the wealthy. It also made them fear that an American socialist movement could quickly sweep the nation. Also, Hoover was blatantly racist. Story 17. True impact of triple reactor meltdown at Fukushima, related ecological disaster, and escalation of cancer risk. I'm not a scientist, but I am a lifelong nuclear energy and physics enthusiast, and the Fukushima disaster was something I followed and studied closely. The fact that 80% of the fallout went right into the ocean is a good thing as far as nuclear disasters go. One of the reasons much of the US nuclear weapons testing was done around the Marshall Islands was because of how little relative impact the testing would have been in the middle of the ocean. The bad effects mostly occurred at the time that the tests were conducted, accidents mostly. These were mostly thermonuclear bombs, releasing far, far more energy and fallout than Fukushima. Water is a very good radiation shield, and ocean currents very quickly distribute the fallout materials. Initial energy released as radiation disperses immediately. It's a one and done thing. Fallout is all the physical matter that's unstable and decays radioactively. Dispersing it in the air and on land gives an easy path into many ecosystems and connected biomes. But in the ocean, the material is spread quickly into much, much, much lower concentration and mostly settles to the bottom, totally out of reach of anything above the water. In fact, despite so much of the fallout going into the ocean, the remaining fallout on land is what's doing all the damage. And even then, the number of people, mostly people who were in utero or born around the time of the disaster, is in the 10s and almost definitely below 100. Granted, the effects are tragic and horrible because it's almost always a terrible form of cancer, but still, it will prove out to be relatively few people. Remember that most of the fallout escaped the reactor because seawater broke into the system, which then pulled most of it out into the ocean. By contrast, Chernobyl was so acutely bad because it was entirely on and underground, with prevailing winds carrying lots of fallout over a huge area of land. Story 18. The truth of UFOs UAP. It's been stigmatized and obfuscated for 70 plus years. I believe there are multiple facets at play. The truth is going to be ontologically shocking for the majority of the populace, and the government doesn't believe we're prepared to handle the truth. The technology, potentially 0 point free energy, is so exotic and world changing that it could threaten economic collapse. Similarly, the technology could possibly be exploited by bad actors and enemies of the state. On that same note, they may not want us to know how much they've invested in and have used the technology to develop weapon systems and other military projects, which would lead to even further public distrust. It's clear at this point that the government has acknowledged the existence of UAP and that the phenomenon is indeed real, but they continue to avoid transparency and disclosure for fear of the outcome it may have on society. But it should not be their decision to make. We should be allowed to know the truth and be given the free will to deal with that truth however we may. It may break down the walls of some of our societal paradigms, but it may also help to unite us in ways we can't yet comprehend. As a moderator of our UFOs with millions of members and an ever growing population, I think it's clear that people just want to know the truth and be allowed to make their own decisions. This topic is no longer niche and should no longer be stigmatized. It is the most important truth of our lifetime, and perhaps the most important and significant truth in humanity's history. We may not be alone, and the reality of their origin may be stranger and more incomprehensible than we could have imagined. Story 19. I don't think it's necessarily a secret, but I think the federal government, with the exception of the useless in Congress, are doing everything within their power to avoid looking too closely at the Biden family business. The amount of shell corporations, aliases, and money changing hands was insane. We know Joe Biden demanded that the Ukrainian government fire a prosecutor who was looking into his son's company. He threatened to withhold $1 billion in aid. Maybe that guy was crooked, But since when is the vice president allowed to withhold foreign aid till internal changes are made in other governments? Story 20. The government has 24/7 video, like Google Earth, but a video. Back in 2007, they had that capability in small areas. I was in Quantico, and they were tracking a cartel guy's movements from days prior via satellite videos of a citywide area. So I am guessing by now it's expanded to almost everywhere. That means 99% of crimes, such kidnappings, could be solved just by starting at a location and rewinding a person's movements on the video, but also opens up Pandora's box, which is probably why it's virtually unheard of. Fun fact, around the same time, they had a similar city-funded project in Baltimore, I believe, where they would fly a plane with high-def cameras on the weekends, when severe crime rates are highest, and use it to catch criminals. Story 21. Whatever insane, unethical experiments any number of U.S. government agencies have been conducting on the American populace since 2001, and likely still are. The precedent has already long been set by MKUltra, purposely infecting African Americans with diseases under the false claim of vaccinating them to see how it spreads, and a whole slew of other heinous things done for the good of the nation in the past as a result of declassification bringing these acts to light. There is no moral bar they can't or won't dig under and keep going lower, and classification plus government info secrecy/record deletion means no one who isn't actively participating will know until long after everyone responsible is too senile to prosecute or outright dead. I'd be far more shocked to find out that they weren't conducting unethical, twisted experiments on the US populace in secret and had actually kept things squeaky clean on homeland soil since those days. And if someone were to offer proof they weren't doing it to foreign nations at least, I'd be certain I was living in a simulation, because no way in hell is that possible in reality. Story 22. The UAP black programs. There is over $1 trillion unaccounted for in the last 5 failed audits for the DoD. In 2022, the DoD was audited for the 5th consecutive time. 61% of its entire budget was unaccounted for. How is this not a bigger issue to our country? Its total budget was 3.5 trillion in assets. The money went into all these black programs in the Department of Defense, ranging from things like parapsychology to UAPs to anti-gravity to secret weapons, etc. Anything that would be considered paranormal or fringe was kept secret out of fear of funding being cut. Paranoia, fear of other military competition, or an arms race. But they had a couple breakthroughs in these areas of study, I'm guessing, and needed a crazy amount of money. Maybe the ability of these programs to stay in the dark has something to do with these breakthroughs, giving them more political power or influence. If you don't believe me or think this topic is bullcrap, feel free to ask questions. I don't think these things are aliens or ETs. We just don't know what they are, but they're there. Whether you believe in UAPs or not, you have to admit that we should address the audit and acknowledge the whistleblowers who fear for their lives, have nothing to gain from coming forward. You also should admit that there's a huge stigma around the subject. All scientists should learn about the manufactured aspect of the stigma. That opened up my worldview and made me realize that there's something true to this phenomenon. I've been studying this subject for years and have gone from skeptic to believer very gradually. I don't want to believe this is true. It's very hard to go on with my mundane life knowing that I can see a piece of the big picture. We don't know anything about this subject. The stigma makes even the most respected scientists completely ignore and dismiss the entire subject altogether. That is not a very scientific or logical way to look at the world. It seems to me like, historically, we've always had this false confidence that we've been at the apex of human knowledge until the next breakthrough, and so on and so forth. The fool says he knows everything. The wise man admits to knowing nothing. Let's not be the adults in the room. Let's look at the world with a childlike, unbiased perspective. Story 23. Literally everything. Why would the most powerful government in the world actively release all criminal activities they are involved in? When people say that the USA is the greatest country in the world, they have zero idea how many years of arduous propaganda it took to get here. They own every facet of your life, from media conglomerates to hospitals to social media. Anytime someone provides evidence of foul play, they are labeled a conspiracy theorist. As a non American, I think it's insulting to human development to create two sides and then force humans to pick. The choice is not real and has no impact on a global scale. They ask if you want pizza or hot dogs. Then you find out both are covered in crap, but you have to choose. And because your family grew up eating crappy hot dogs, you must carry on the family lineage by eating crap, then smile and argue over whose crap smells less. Story 24. I think it's true at all levels of government, from your local city council to the White House. A huge portion of money that the government spends goes straight to friends, relatives, and business contacts. If I had to guess, I would say at least 50% of the trillions that US governments at every level spend is by any reasonable definition corruption. The road crumbles and the city council decides not to pursue the construction company in court. It's someone's brother-in-law, a council member's, the police chief's, the janitor who the council member is friends with, whatever, or cousin's friend's company, and a phone call just saved the company millions in liability. Stuff like that, 500 times a day.